When you are a police officer has a very limited license to use force. In our society, we have taken the appropriate steps to make sure that as objectively as possible, you're able to see what the officers were presented with, what the civilians were presented with. These matters today involve both homicide and the use of force by police officers. And the question is whether or not the use of force is justified. The first incident I want to talk about occurred on October 31st of 2022. The matter was communicated to State Police Katanning Barracks through 911 in response to the request for a domestic violence assistance call. There is a history involving the individual who was accused of the violence on this particular occasion. His name is Zachary Cervice. One of the troopers had been involved in a prior incident in May of 2022. It involved domestic violence directed at Cervice's mother. On that occasion, he took several guns and was found a short time later at a Port Authority park and ride. There was an incident that occurred in 2001. Mr. Cervice was involved in some major crime. He served 5 to 10 years. Prior incident, the propensity to use weapons, the possibility of weapons being in play, and the fact that Mr. Cervice had previously hurt somebody in connection with a domestic dispute. Zachary's mother was taken from the residence by Zachary's girlfriend and took them to what they believed to be a safe location about 4 minutes away on Shamrock Lane. There were injuries involved on this particular occasion. Mr. Cervice was armed and he was suicidal. Mr. Cervice had suffered from a bipolar condition, was not being treated by medication, and consequently was problematic on occasion. When the troopers arrived at Shamrock Lane, they arrived in 2 separate vehicles. 3 troopers entered the home. 2 more troopers stayed outside for civilian and officer safety. This is a rural area with a very long driveway. This is not a safe house. Mr. Cervice had some idea where his girlfriend and his mother were and had made the trip over to Shamrock Lane. This is 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. As the vehicle comes up the driveway, the lights are on, it's night. It becomes closer to the state troopers and the technology in their vehicles. You can clearly see that this is Mr. Cervice. You can also see that Mr. Cervice has brought a weapon. It is an AK-47 style assault rifle, and it is strapped to Mr. Cervice's chest, and there is a 50-round magazine, a drum magazine. The barrel of the weapon is over the steering wheel. Despite the numerous commands that were given to Mr. Cervice failed to drop his weapon, and he exits the vehicle with the weapon, and in response to that, the troopers fired upon Mr. Cervice. Mr. Cervice died. He was hit 5 times, but as Mr. Cervice fell to the ground, there's clearly a weapon. Also in connection with the work at the medical examiner's office, Mr. Cervice had a blood alcohol level of 1.79. He had methamphetamine in his system. He also had cocaine in his system. All the indications were that Mr. Cervice was armed and dangerous, prepared to use the weapon, and prepared to use the weapon on police officers. He had previously hurt people. The 2 women who were in the house were hurt on different occasions. We have a mechanism in place on a regular basis to objectively communicate with the public and to show them exactly what happened on a particular occasion. Mr. Cervice comes up the driveway. He's driving right towards a state police vehicle which has technology, and you can see everything that Mr. Cervice did or didn't do. Unfortunately, you can't hear the commands, but the commands apparently were communicated loudly enough and sufficiently in terms of number of times. We concluded, based on all the evidence, the officers were in fact justified in the use of deadly force, and that on this particular occasion it was necessary not only to protect themselves but to protect the women that were already being victimized.